The judge is Puerto Rican. She is a woman. She grew up in the projects of the Bronx, but continued on to Princeton, where she graduated second in her class in law school. She's also, though, a racist and a bigot. At least that is what some high-profile Republicans are saying about the president's pick to fill the vacated Supreme Court justice seat. Here is what Rush Limbaugh says about Sonia Sotomayor. Quote, "Here you have a racist. You might want to soften that, and you might want to say a reverse racist." Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, quote, "New racism is no better than old racism." He tweeted this. More from Newt, quote, "White man racist nominee would be forced to withdraw. Latina woman racist should also withdraw." What is it that has them so fired up? This is a quote from the judge 8 years ago, where she says, go ahead, Raj, put that up for me if you would, "A wise Latina woman would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male." To be fair, though, let's add context and see the quote in its complete form. And it does sound a bit different when we do that, and we want to do that. So let's put that one up now if we possibly can. And let me read to you from that. "I would hope that a wise Latina woman with the richness of her experiences would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male," and this is the part a lot of folks will point to, "who hasn't lived that life, who hasn't lived that life." She goes on, by the way, that thing goes on for quite a long time. It's very nuanced, and she goes on to point out that many, many men, white men, have come to decisions on the Supreme Court that were good for many minorities. So, regardless, the drumbeat continues. Listen to what Tom Tancredo said last night on CNN, for example.
Everybody is afraid to challenge her on it for fear of themselves being called racist. So, therefore, it sets this perfect stage. There is no other way. Absolutely. You would have to admit, I cannot believe that even this show, even this network, even you guys would not agree that anybody else saying something like that, anybody who is attempting to especially reach the highest court in the land, would immediately be disqualified. There is absolutely no two ways about it. That is what she said. And by the way, it wasn't a slip of the tongue. That quote was in her prepared text. It's not something she stumbled upon. And you try to, I will be interested to see how she tries to explain that during that hearing.
And there's the man himself now, Tom Tancredo, live from Denver. Tom Tancredo, 5-term Republican congressman from Colorado. And we're also going to be joined by Eric Boehlert. He's with Media Matters for America, the group that says they can correct conservative misinformation in this country. Good to have you both. Tom Tancredo, good to see you again.
Likewise.
Let me
good
start,
to be here.
Let me start with you. Judge Sotomayor is a racist?
Let me tell you that, well, certainly her words would indicate that that is the truth. What else can I say? How else can, I can't look at her heart. I have nothing that can analyze her soul. All I can tell you, and just exactly like the things I say are always, used about describing me in one way or the other, all of us in public life have to deal with that. And when you are looking to be on the Supreme Court, don't be surprised that if you say something like that, or if you belong to an organization called Raza, in this case, which is, from my point of view anyway, just nothing more than a Latino, it's a counterpart, it's a Latino KKK without the hoods or the nooses. If you belong to something like that, you have to explain that in a way that's going to convince me and a lot of other people that it's got nothing to do with race, even though the logo for La Raza is all for the race, nothing for the rest.
All right, we're not talking about.
You know what? She's a member.
We're not
she's
talking
a member
about
of
La
La
Raza
Raza
here, though. We're talking about that specific.
But she's
quote.
a member.
But the thing that has
she's a member of La Raza.
The thing that has you and Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich saying that she's a bigot is this statement that she made. Eric, have a go at it.
Well, even you, Rick, are leaving out the context. The statement was a part of a speech where she was addressing specifically judicial diversity when it comes to race and sex discrimination cases. That's where she's saying, if you bring your life experience to the bench, that a certain a member of the bench could make, in her opinion, a better decision on sex and age, on sex and race discrimination cases. She wasn't saying that, Latino women make better judges and things like that. So it's absurd. And frankly, this is a rush, no pun, this is a rush to the gutter from the right. 48 hours after, the Supreme Court nominee, and we're talking about if she's a racist or not, based on a sentence from a speech 8 years ago. This is really pathetic. This is pathetic.
Tom, the thing about this is that I've got to challenge you on is when she says, then a male who hasn't lived that life. I mean, isn't she right?
Regardless.
Tom Tancredo, let me ask you a question. Have you ever worn spiked heels?
No,
I'm serious.
I have not. Now,
do you know what it's?
Does that disqualify me from being a Supreme Court justice?
No, but it disqualifies you from making decisions where you know what it's like for women who may be suing a company who have worn spiked heels. Is there nothing?
Baloney.
Why are we?
Baloney. Rick. That is absolute baloney. I couldn't make a judgment simply because I've never worn spike heels about whether or not the law is correctly applied. That's ridiculous.
No, wait.
That's
ridiculous. Tom. It's not that you couldn't make a judgment. It's that wouldn't it be fair to say that someone who's had a specific experience would be able to use that experience, whether they're a woman, whether they're of Italian descent like you, whether they're a Cuban descent like me, and say, you know what, that would probably serve me well, whether I'm a journalist, a judge, a congressman, or whatever.
I hope and pray that the decisions made by the members of the Supreme Court are based upon the law, not about how they feel about the law. This isn't
and you know,
you say to the guy, how do you feel about? Can you teach music? No, but think the minuet in G. Well, she's saying, I guess the law doesn't matter, but I feel the law in a way that other people can't. What is this? Why don't we just throw out the Constitution?
Let me ask you a question.
Why don't we just amend the Constitution?
Let me ask you a question. This is something that's dear to your heart.
Okay.
Let me read to you from another person on the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
When I get a case about discrimination, I have to think about people in my own family who suffered discrimination because of their ethnic background or because of religion or because of gender. I do take that into account. My own personal background and my own family members. That's Judge Alito talking. Why weren't you on CNN complaining about that when he made that statement?
Well, this is completely
I never heard it, but let me tell you, had I heard it, let me suggest to you that there is something different about saying my background will always influence the way I see. Nobody argues that. Who would not think that anybody's background, all their life experiences, would not be part of the way they see the world?
That's all she said.
But it does that. She goes far beyond that. In
no, she actually says less than that.
And because of the color, because a brown woman.
In discrimination cases,
that is a racist statement. You cannot get away from it, you guys.
To be
you're
fair,
just completely ignoring the context. You're just completely ignoring the
context. You haven't had a chance to say anything for a while here, Eric, so go ahead. What is the context?
Like I said, her statement was in the context of discrimination cases, and she's saying as a woman and as a Latino, she would bring a certain perspective, just as Judge Alito and every other Supreme Court nominee who's gone through a nomination conference, a hearing has said. Clarence Thomas talked about how he would bring his background.
Well, I got to tell you, I looked at this thing, and it would have taken us probably 10 minutes to read the entire thing. It's that nuanced and that long, kind of tough to do.
She has gone on.
Right, that's why it's important to keep the context. That's why it's important to keep the context.
Let's go on and look.
Here's what I'll do.
Yeah,
Good
go on
arguments.
and look at the rest of her statement.
Congressman,
go on and look at the other things that she
That's
says,
what we're going to do. I'm going to put it on
which actually make this worse.
I'm going to put it on my website, all right? CNN.com/Rick Sanchez. We'll put the entire thing
And you have to understand
context.
this is the one sentence. This is the one sentence they're highlighting in the last 8 years. One sentence in one speech, and it's even bogus now.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Good argument. I'm glad we had a chance to express some good thoughts on both sides. Eric and, of course, Congressman Tom Tancredo. Good to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you, too. Anytime.
Likewise.